Hi, this is Ron Sukenick for Rocky Mountain Writers, and today we're talking to Steve Katz, who is a novelist and an old friend of mine. Steve and I go way back. Steve is the author of The Exaggerations of Peter Prince, that was his first book, 3 Gs, Creamy and Delicious, Posh, an erotic novel, The Weight of Antony, Moving Parts, Stolen Stories, Weir and Poos, Flory of Washington Heights, and 43 Fictions. Speaking of Flory of Washington Heights, Steve, I know that book had a certain base in autobiography. To begin with, when were you born?
In 1935, on the 14th of May.
And how does that, your early life, work into Flory of Washington Heights? I should say that Flory of Washington Heights is the first part of a long trilogy of 3 books, including Flory, Weir and Poos, and Swanee's Way. And this is the last of the series. This is called Swanee's Way. Can we get a close-up of Swanee's Way? Book that's gotten very good notices and is selling very well. I'm told they have 40 copies in the tattered cover alone in Denver. So anyway, Steve, how does that figure with your early life, Flory in Washington Heights?
Well, Flory is probably the novel I should have written first in my career. It's like it's a nostalgic novel about growing up in Manhattan in the late 40s, early 50s, and where I was a member of the New York Bullets Social and Athletic Club.
Was it more social or more athletic?
It was both. You know, we got purple and gold satin reversible jackets that were supposed to attract the girls.
As I remember from the book, it was basically a gang of muggers, no?
No, it wasn't actually. The Fanwoods were the muggers, and we were kind of good kids.
And where does the anthology or the trilogy go from there?
Well, actually, Flory of Washington Heights is the second book in the trilogy. Weir and Poos is the first, and Swanee's Ways is the third. And it's not a trilogy. I don't like to call it a trilogy because it isn't like a sequential trilogy. Although there are some sequences in it, I like to call it a threesome because it's a little sexier, and there are more different ways of approaching the stories than they are sort of a sequence of events. But it does go from the 50s to the 90s in terms of the lives of the characters.
And when was the last one published?
Swanee's Ways in 1995. Won the America Award in Fiction.
So that's they're all still in the stores. I know that this is Sun and Moon Press. Sun and Moon Press is a small press that has the advantage of keeping one's books in print forever, as opposed to the big presses which can retire them from the bookshelves in maybe 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, well, they also do. Douglas Messerly, who's the editor of Sun and Moon Press, also brings back some books in translation and in English worthy of.
Who are some of the others that he publishes?
Well, he publishes Bob Steiner. You know. Yeah. You know that he published a book. Publishes Juna Barnes, Gertrude Stein. An enormous
distinguished company, I'm sure. Well, we're going to focus on Steve's publishing career in a minute, but first I'd like to get a little more background. I know that you attended Cornell University and began in the veterinary school. I know this because Steve and I were classmates at Cornell University, but Steve began in the veterinary school. Why did you begin in the veterinary school?
Well, I began in the agriculture school. I was doing pre-vet. Well, because I never had an animal when I was a kid. I always wanted a dog, and I figured if I became a veterinarian, I could have a dog. So I went into pre-vet, and they tried to convince me to stay there, but unfortunately, everything looked better in liberal arts, and when I could afford it, I transferred.
Well, I heard that you finally got a dog, but you shot it. Is that right?
I threw it out the window when my first kid was born, because it came into the house and threw up on the rug.
That's certainly a good reason to throw it out the window. I know that Steve was fascinated with animals in his early career because I distinctly remember seeing Exaggerations of Peter Prince in which Steve Katz is methodically slaughtering a group of cats. Is that right?
Right. Eliminating the cats.
Why did you want to eliminate the cats?
I don't remember.
Okay,
that was a long time ago.
That's a good answer. Do you remember the Cornell writing ambiance at that time and how we fit into that? I know there are a lot of famous writers in their youth there. For example, you once gave a reading with Tom Pynchon, right?
Yeah, it was a great reading actually with Tom Pynchon and Richard Farina and
Harold
Schimmel, who was also
now famous Israeli poet.
Yeah, he writes in Hebrew now in Israel, and sort of well known to all the writers who go to.
Yeah, Tom Pynchon writes in Hebrew too.
Well, yeah, he does actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And who else was there at the time? William Gass.
Yeah, William Gass was there, and just before that
Joanna Russ.
That guy who did the Howard Hughes, the phony Howard Hughes.
The phony Howard Hughes. Yeah, I don't remember his name. Clifford Irving.
Clifford Irving, right?
Yeah.
Right. We all were there together.
Nabokov.
Yeah, and Vladimir Nabokov. Yeah, he was there.
What kind of contact did you have with Nabokov?
I had among people who study Nabokov a well-known interaction with him, where he read a novel of mine and wrote comments on it. And
on the manuscript, you mean?
On the manuscript, yeah. Which I was able to sell later for quite a bit of money. And went
should have given him more.
Well, I would have liked to, but I went to his office and he sort of hovered in this high stool over me and stared down at me in this broken down easy chair while Vera, his wife, told me what he thought.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
Vera, his wife, also would write on the blackboard for him and write what he thought in his classes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I remember I had a long conversation with Nabokov about literature in which he would only talk about cricket, which I knew nothing about. Mm-hmm. But we knew Nabokov as basically a butterfly expert who wrote for the New Yorker.
Yeah, he was a great entomologist.
Yeah.
He had a couple of butterflies named after him. I wish I had a couple of butterflies.
You mean there are butterflies named Nabokov?
Well, yeah, there were Nabokovian butterflies. Yeah,
I remember he was writing Lolita at the time we were there, I guess, and I remember when it finally came out, you had to buy it under the table in a brown wrapper. It was published in Olympia Press because it was illegal here.
Yeah, Nabokov is great, but we ought to talk about my work.
That's true. How about how Cornell affected your work?
Oh, I can't even think that it had much of an effect on it. I mean, Cornell didn't make much difference.
How about when you moved into New York and went to the Lower East Side and got involved with some of the other arts? Did that have an effect on you? I remember.
Well, I always was involved with other artists. I enjoyed talking to painters and to composers more. Their talk about art was more spontaneous and more fertile than it seemed to me writers who always are guarding their words and trying to make perfect sentences, and they're very hard to talk to. So I hung out with a lot of painters who later became very famous.
Like who?
Well, I knew Jim Dine pretty well, and Bob Smithson, and Charles Ross, and Phil Glass was a good friend of mine, and still is, and Steve Reich, and all these people who sort of came up in this movement. Bryce Marden I knew pretty well, and Michael Heiser. I mean, just all these people, and the conversation was usually pretty fertile, and it was about the arts, and it informed my work a lot.
More than writing, would you say? More than other writers?
Well, I was always aware of what other writers were doing, but I got much more out of being around those people because of the way I was. You know, going to rehearsals at, say, Steve Reich's place was like one of the richest experiences, or going to these, Phil's early concerts.
Phil Glass.
Early rehearsals were great, or going to openings where these people were showing this work that later became like the revolutionary work. Was made me look at my writing as something more than just either the telling of stories or the recording of events. It made me look at it as in terms of just what this object is, what the book is that I'm doing, what it is as an object, and that particularly early on, and the Exaggerators of Peter Prince and Moving Parts, and some of the other books like was an important aspect of the work. Not just the writing of it, but how it presents itself.
I know you had some experience in film. What did you write for film?
Oh, well, I did one film that got on, which was called Grassland, but now I think when you can rent it, it circulates as Hex.
Hex?
Hex, yeah.
It's still available in the video stores.
It still is, yeah, in some places. Like the video station has a copy, I think. And it had in it some people early in their careers who became later fairly famous, like Gary Busey and Keith Carradine and
Henry Crow Dog.
Well, Henry Crow Dog was part of it.
How was it? Henry Crow Dog was a famous Sioux medicine man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How was it to work with Henry Crow Dog?
Well, I couldn't say I worked with him. I sort of sat at his feet. You know, he was a great man. He was a great. People go to India to look for shamans, and he was a shaman right here. And I was lucky enough to be in a cottage with him on the movie set. You know, and I was sort of in charge of taking care of him. And he was this wonderful human.
How old was he at the time?
He was in his 70s. You know, but a very tall kind of. Elegant, powerful guy. And, yes, some water here.
I once ran across his son, who was also a medicine man, Leonard Crow Dog. Did you know Leonard?
Yeah, Leonard is kind of a huckster.
Is he?
Yeah, I thought, he was, I always thought Henry was the real thing. And, Leonard tried to make a living at it. Henry never did.
He went to jail,
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was for smoking peyote and the rituals. I'm not sure. Maybe it was for the...
Yeah, you don't smoke peyote, you eat it. And he didn't go for that. He went because he was at
Wounded Knee.
Yeah, Wounded Knee. Because they eat peyote legally. The Native American church is founded on a jute sack full of peyote buttons, and I did a sweat with them, and that was pretty amazing because Henry was able to lead you in some kind of spiritual trip.
I remember Leonard told me that his father didn't want him to learn English or learn to read or write. Why do you suppose he did that? Got any insight into that?
Well, books are expensive. I think he probably didn't want him to have to buy books, But Leonard would tell you that story. I thought Henry could read.
Just lazy.
Yeah.
Henry could read?
Yeah, Henry could read.
Was Henry in any other movies besides yours?
Yeah, he was in Little Big Man.
Ah, right, yeah.
And he was in several movies. Whenever they wanted like a Buffalo Nickel-looking kind of Native American, they chose Henry.
Did your film experience feed back into your writing at all?
Well, I wrote a book about that called Cheyenne River Wild Track, which is a book of poems about, so it fed back that way. Yeah, of course, everything I experience feeds into my writing.
Yeah. I know some good writers have been so fed back into by film they don't write any fiction anymore. I saw a film by Rudy Wurlitzer the other night on TV about India.
Little Buddha.
Yeah, Little Buddha, yeah, which I thought was pretty good. But he doesn't much write anymore, does he? Fiction.
Well, he published a book called, he published a reminiscence called Hard Times on, so it's about his spiritual journey, I can't remember the title exactly. Then he published a book called Slow Fade a few years ago, which didn't get much attention, but I think is a wonderful book.
That's the one about Vietnam or something?
No, it's the one about traveling in India.
It's traveling in India.
Yeah. That's part of it, but it's about a movie director, very much like some famous movie director whose name doesn't come to me
Bertolucci.
right now. No.
I know he worked with Bertolucci. Anyway, let's get back to your career. I know you've had a very up and down publishing career, as have I, and many other great writers like us. And what do you have to say about the way you've been published?
I think it's amazing that I've been published at all. First of all, I write some pretty weird books, and I'm flattered that somebody takes enough of an interest in them to publish them at all. But I've had some strange experiences. My best experience was when I published a book myself called The Lestriad. That was the first book I published. That I published when I was living in Italy, southern Italy, and with Harold Schimmel, the same poet. We each published a little book that later got picked up. It sort of was responsible for getting me into Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, and was recently republished as this The Lestriad, which is...
Who published that edition?
A little press called Bamberger Books, also a very nice experience.
Have you had some nice experiences with big publishers also?
Less. You expect too much from big publishers and they don't deliver. And they're not as professional as you think they're going to be. For instance, when my book Saw was published, this book, I don't know if you want to look at it, but when Saw was published...
Saw is a science fiction, early...
It has a
early literary science fiction book.
Yeah, well, the first few boxes of it, they forgot to put glue in the bindings. And those are the ones that go to reviewers, so when they opened them up, these pages fluttered to the ground.
Well, they probably thought it was part of it.
They thought it was part of the book, and that's what they talked about.
That's what they talked about?
Yeah.
Actually...
Yeah, the New York Times review was about how the pages fell out of the book when he opened it. And that was... So that was a pretty horrible experience, and I didn't know... I didn't feel my power enough to go in and really get pissed off, that this happened. I should have done that, but I didn't.
And what could you have done anyway?
Nothing much. I could have got them to republish it, maybe. I mean, I doubt it. Yeah.
What was your absolutely worst editorial experience?
Well, you don't get much of an editorial hit from publishers anymore. They're too busy to edit books. They pretty much are responsible for it yourself. And if you have good friends who are good editors, you should show them the book and get some editorial help. The good experience was with Exaggerations of Peter Prince, because things were still on a level where they gave it several editorial approaches. One of them being very strong copy editing, where they queried you about all the facts.
What kind of advice would you give to a young writer who's starting his publishing career with regard to publishing?
Persist.
Persist? For how long? Forever?
Forever, yeah. I figured if I didn't publish my first book till I was 30 or 31. I figured if by the time I was 70, I hadn't published a book, I'd find something else to do. But that's the only way to do it. If you have the writing bug, is to keep doing it, is to persist.
You think the publishing industry is any different now from the way it used to be when you started?
Well, I think the electronic media has changed things, and publishers answer much more to big corporations and bottom line concerns. So it's a little more difficult. I mean, when I first published with Random House, they were in half of the Archdiocese building
I remember that beautiful building.
Yeah, in Manhattan, and you went up there and there was Bennett Cerf walking around. Still was walking around at the time, and his son edited my book, and
Christopher Cerf.
Yeah, Christopher Cerf, and it was sort of like a small press is now practically, but now Random House is part of what some huge conglomerate, maybe owned by Sony. I don't know.
Yeah, actually the whole publishing industry has imploded and is owned basically by international conglomerates, 8 of them to be specific.
So it's part of the entertainment industry essentially.
Yeah.
And so for someone like you or myself who's sort of serious about your art, it's it's a different question. You just have to.
I remember Christopher Cerf once told me that all publishers are liars, and I thought that was a serious kind of indictment coming from the son of Bennett Cerf. What do you think? Think all publishers are liars?
I don't know why. Well, why he told you that was.
I assume because he knew his father very well. Bennett Cerf was one of the great famous editors.
Also a writer, but I don't know how you can answer that question. I mean.
Okay, don't answer. Would you like to say more about your publishing career before we leave that? I wanted to get into some other aspects of your
Yeah. Well, you know, just that small presses are a great opportunity. They'd also say that to young writers. Unfortunately, the NEA has dwindled, and small presses aren't supported by them anymore. But a few are still viable. Some are going out of business. The Fiction Collective is one. I did 2 books at the Fiction Collective.
It's not going out of business.
It's not going out of business.
Except that Congress is investigating it at the moment.
Well, that's good. That'll be good for it. And Sun and Moon, you know, is doing a great service. And their coffee house, there are several small presses, Black Sparrow. So.
There's one big advantage, of course, to the small presses, and that is they keep the books in print.
Right.
Whereas all my books, and I suspect yours from the major publishers, are now out of print.
Right. It goes from the printer to the shredder.
I know you've had a lot of experience with Italy, and you've lived in Italy, and your kids have grown up in Italy. And I especially remember one hair-raising story you told about how your first son was circumcised. Do you want to tell that story? Because
well, it's in We're in Poos. There's a great circumcision story in We're in Poos, but he was circumcised by, well, both my other kids are circumcised, otherwise I wouldn't have done it, and I didn't want to see him to grow up uncircumcised, you know, stand at the urinal with his brothers and be uncircumcised. You know. So I got this doctor, and he'd never done it before. He'd seen one a year he'd done it. He was in Chicago, and we did it on the kitchen table in my house. He brought a bottle of wine and his assistant, and it took him like a half hour. And I was supposed to hold the kid's legs, and I fainted. And he sort of looks like he's been circumcised with a pinking shears, but otherwise he's okay.
Well, the question I wanted to ask you was, what was that wine that he used?
What?
What was the wine that he used?
Lacrima Christi, the Tears of Christ.
And do you drink that wine these days?
What? No, I've never drunk it again.
Do you miss New York? New York City?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, New York is the city that's eternally missed. by everybody who used to be there and isn't there anymore, and even by people who don't live there, or who never lived there.
Do you get back there much?
Yeah, I go back. Not as often as I used to, but at least once or twice a year.
What do you do when you go back there?
I have a son who lives there. And I visit him, and I visit the few friends I have that are left there. Most of them have left. And go to galleries, go to shows. I do what everyone else does. And I used to network a little more, try to network a little more. I never was very good at it in the publishing world, but I don't do that anymore.
I know you have one interest besides Italy that consumes a good part of your attention, and that is Tai Chi. I know you've taught Tai Chi, and you're very advanced in it. What level are you at?
Well, I'm 15th degree pink slipper. I don't know why. There are no levels in internal martial arts. I mean, they don't give belts like they do in Japanese and
they don't give belts, but they belt you.
Yeah, they don't give belts or in Korean martial arts, and it's a very deep and broad study, and I've been doing several forms of Tai Chi, and also Bagua and Xinyi, and there are great teachers in Denver. That's one reason I like staying in Denver, is because of Bing Lee and Sifu Mike Bingo, who are magnificent teachers of this art, who know how to do what they tell you to do. You know, which is very difficult to find in a teacher.
Does it affect your writing at all, would you say?
Well, it did. It does. It does. The movement, my writing is very close to the way I move, and the movement in Tai Chi at first affected it more obviously than it does now. Now the effects are more subtle, and they have to do with the breath and the extension of a gesture.
Do you move when you write?
Sometimes.
How do you move?
Up and down, side to side. I roll on the floor. I hang by my legs from the ceiling.
Would you like to, we have only a few minutes left, would you like to read a little bit of something before we split?
We're going to split? I haven't done that since the 60s. Okay, well, I'll read a poem.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is called William Reichert, and it's from this book called Journalism, this Beautiful cover by George Schneemann. And this is called William Reichert, and it's a series of poems I wrote when I worked in a prison, teaching in a prison. And this is one of the prisoners' monologues. It goes like this. I showed the doctor the stones, and he said, "Those aren't from your kidneys. You picked them up in the prison yard." When I initiated the malpractice suit, he began to fill out papers to commit me to the bug house. I could feel the noose tighten. It could have been for life. Once you're in, there's no way you get out. The state examiner got here just in time and ordered me to Albany for a checkup. I went to the hospital 3 times in back of a car, handcuffed between 3 different pairs of guards. And I listened to them talk about their families and their church picnics and going hunting. And what I noticed they had in common was that none of them ever thought beyond the next weekend. After the operation in the hospital dining room, I was watched by a guard who opened my package of plastic silverware and took away the knife and fork and left me a spoon to cut the roast beef. I asked for the knife back just for a minute, just to cut the beef. The guard said no. I asked him to cut it for me. He said he wasn't a waiter. He wouldn't let the nurse cut it either, so I went down on the beef with my mouth like an animal. Later, I got this guard to take me to the showers and told him what a prick he'd been in the dining room. "It's just my job," he said. I couldn't believe what happened next.
I think that's about all we have time for. So in order to find out what happens
the best
next,
part is coming.
you'll have to buy the book. Thank you very much. This is Rocky Mountain Writers. I'm Ron Sukenick, and this is the great author, Steve Katz. Thank you.